Dr. Reginald Jarrell, who grew up here in Wichita and a few years earlier. He's written a book, 31 Days and Nights, about some of his experiences in Wichita back in a more difficult time than I hope we're having now. He'll tell you more about his life experiences. So Reggie, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. And again, I'm just very appreciative of this opportunity to chat with you about 31 days and my writing experiences. I grew up here in Wichita, Kansas, and went through the Wichita School District from kindergarten through 12th grade. I attended Ingalls Elementary School, which has been demolished, and it's now on that space, Sam Spade Elementary. Then I attended Mayberry Junior High School. And when I attended Mayberry, that was the first year of integration here in Wichita. And I remember very vividly riding the school bus number 85, from my house on Hyatt Street to Mayberry Junior High, which is in West Wichita. So again, spent 3 years at Mayberry Junior High. That's where if you could say, I found myself, found my niche, or at least discovered what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be. And then from Mayberry Junior High, I went to Wichita West High Pioneers. Then afterwards, my excursion or adventures to various colleges. My writing started, however, when I was in elementary school. I was the type of child, of course, I played, had friends, and so on and so forth. But my spare time, I would write. So I would write poems. And I still have those very brief, very expressive poems that I wrote back in 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And I look at those and I said, well, okay, I didn't know it at the time, but I was serious about writing. I mean, I found it enjoyable. So I say all that to say, in junior high school, there was a publications class, and that featured working on the school, meaning Mayberry Junior High. So there was a newspaper class, publications, at Mayberry Junior High. So I took that and continued to learn how to write newspaper style. And then when I went to West High School, continued the journalism classes. My first part-time job was at the Wichita Eagle and Beacon in the sports department as a part-timer. And what it was, they called it the telephone crew. And I'm thinking I was a junior in high school at the time. And it took place, meaning the job took place during football season. And what happened was they hired a bunch of high school kids to come and answer the telephone to take football scores. That's all. They had a form, touchdowns, a basic form that we utilized. And we would answer the phones, I want to say like from 9 to 11, something like that, when the various athletic directors or coaches were calling the scores. So from there, some of us on the telephone crew eventually were asked to go out and cover sports stories, write stories. And that was a big thing, because here it is, we are high school students, and we're going covering high school sports, meaning our peers. So that's, again, was another key step for me, meaning from the standpoint, again, working at the Eagle and Beacon, Friday and Saturday nights, having the opportunity to go out and write stories, sports stories. And then when it was seasonal, meaning from the standpoint, football, basketball, and then when track season, meaning in the spring, well, I didn't work because I ran on the track team at West High. So I say all that to say is, those are my introductions, plural, to writing. organized writing, structured writing, deadlines, meaning from the standpoint, if the news sports editor sent us out on a sports story, meaning high school football game, and the deadline was to have our story by 10:30 or 11, you had to have the story by 10:30, 11, no excuses. Meaning not just Wichita area, but sometimes, especially with basketball season, and they had a number of tournaments in various communities. So I was assigned more than once to go to some of those tournaments outside of Wichita. So we're talking about 10, 15, 20, 25 miles outside of Wichita, and come back in and beat the deadline to publish the sports story. So I say all that to say is my introduction to writing. And again, at the time, it was fun. I enjoyed it. Meaning from the standpoint, I wasn't thinking in terms of, well, one of these days I'm going to grow up and I want to be a journalist. No, I was just thinking in terms for the moment. I enjoyed what I was doing, very educational, informative, and at the same time had the opportunity to interact with the public. Meaning just that, interact with the public. As you can probably guess, it was a learning experience as well. But still, during those formative years, those years that I look back now, I said, okay, it was very important and it was very positive, meaning that structure of the Wichita Eagle and Beacon, and then the classes at West High, very structured, taught me discipline. Meaning from the standpoint, just that. You write a story, if the deadline is, again, midnight, you have the story. No excuses. You come up with something, meaning just that. Where I can't think of anything to write about, or nothing really happened. One team won 100-1. What? No. You write the story, whatever the story is. So I learned that. And at the same time, I learned that you have to pace yourself. You have to learn how to organize your time. You have to learn how to stay focused when, again, you're at a basketball game and you're thinking in terms of, well, I got to get the facts, got to get the story. But at the same time, I have to get back, commute to the Wichita Eagle Beacon newspaper, that 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour. And then I have to allot, okay, all right, time to write to meet the deadline. Well, again, you start writing in the field, meaning from the standpoint, you're gathering the facts, the story, but you're thinking in terms of that lead, that paragraph that you're going to, I'm saying all that to say is you learn, or I learned those types of things. So by the time I started college, my first college that I attended was Baker University in Baldwin City, Kansas. And I went there with the objective of majoring in journalism, communications, writing. And at the time, they had a community college small radio station. And I eventually learned or got on, I won't say the staff, but I had my own radio show. So when I did that, okay, I'm thinking in terms of writing, newspaper, okay, but what about electronic journalism, radio? What about television? Well, Baker didn't have any television facilities. Radio station, yes, but nothing to do with television. So Baker, at that time, had instituted a program with the University of Tulsa, a special one-semester program for Baker students to go to Tulsa and to become immersed in the Tulsa communications program. Meaning at that time, Tulsa, University of Tulsa had excellent television facilities, cameras, studio, just anything that you can think of that a television station would have. University of Tulsa had it. So it was a lab. And so it was a great experience for me because at that point, I wanted an introduction to television, meaning to learn camera work, to learn how to write television news stories, those types of things. And thus, they also not only utilized Tulsa, meaning University of Tulsa professors, but they brought in people from local television stations to teach. So again, my television news writing class was taught by a local television news director. Okay, those type of things. So, spent the Tulsa semester learning all about television, broadcast announcing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was supposed to go back to Baker, but I thought, well, the Baker doesn't have television facilities, and I want to learn more. And I had in the back of my mind, I want to investigate film, how to put films together, how to do movies, so on and so forth. So I applied to several colleges, if I recall, but my main two colleges, main three, two were located in Washington, D.C., and the other, California, University of Southern California, because I wanted to go and study film. Well, I was admitted to University of Southern California, the American University in Washington, and Howard University. So, all right, do I want to go to Los Angeles or do I want to go to Washington, D.C.? Okay, all right. Well, I sat around waiting for a financial aid package from USC. It never came. Okay, despite submitting all my information, it never came. But financial aid packages came from the two Washington, D.C. colleges. So then I had, okay, well, I'm sorry. Financial aid package only came from what? I'm sorry, from American University. So I'm thinking, well, okay, I want to wait for USC, but it's not coming. And I want to hear from the other college in Washington, D.C., but apparently it's not coming. So I do have this one financial aid package offered here at AU. And I remember speaking to a friend of mine at Baker, telling him about my dilemma. What do I do? Do I wait or do I choose to go to DC to go to American? And he said, you better go ahead and take that offer. Go ahead and do it. Go there. It's right there. And I said, yeah, that's right. It's right here. What am I waiting for? So I decided to go to American University in Washington, D.C. You say, well, okay, Kansas young man doing all this planning and preparation to get to American University. Yes, it was a plan. And my plan was to graduate despite transferring in 3 calendar years. So that meant I had to take advanced courses. I had to take heavy loads. I had to watch my grade point average to make sure I could take extra. I had to do all of that to ensure that I can meet my goal of graduating with undergrad in 3 calendar years, despite being a transfer. And I did that. Got to American University, learned how to make films, film lab, film courses, so on and so forth, how to interpret, so on and so forth. And I'm thinking, okay, all right, I love television. I love writing newspaper style. I'm thinking in terms of what about film? What about film? But the more I got involved with film, I realized, well, I'm just not comfortable with everything I think I need to know. So I'm going to focus on television journalism. Go back to television journalism. Okay, all right. I did an internship my senior or my last semester at AU with WRC TV, which was at that time the NBC owned and operated, meaning it was an owned and operated station in DC. When you watch the Washington national news at that time, it was broadcast from the station that I'm talking about. And you're liable to walk down the hall, and there was a weatherman by the name of Willard Scott. He was there, you see him. Walk down to the hall, and you're liable to see David Brinkley walking down the hall. Just that's where they worked. And again, I was an intern, so I just walked the halls and I talked to people and so on and so forth. But I say all that to say is it opened my eyes to, again, journalism and talking to people, becoming comfortable and being willing to step out my comfort zone, to talk, to learn, report, learning my craft. So you say all that, I say all that to say is, when I graduated from AU and returned back to Wichita, you say, why did you do that? Well, Washington, D.C. at the time was a lot of traffic, congested. I remember driving like 3 or 4 blocks away from campus, taking an hour or two on a Saturday afternoon to debate the campus, bumper to bumper. And I said, oh, I just didn't like that. I mean, I just could never adjust to that. And I felt, well, I want to go back home, go back to Wichita and start my career. And I thought I had a recommendation from someone at American University who knew someone at one of the TV stations here who put in a good word for me to have an interview. And I came back to Wichita, Kansas with all my credentials, all my education, all my things I learned, and knock on the door, and the door was slammed shut. I'm telling you that story because, again, 31 Days deals with racism, oppression, prejudice, so on and so forth. And I'm not saying, yes, I had been introduced and I was aware of those types of things before, of which I talk about in my book. But when I came back to Wichita, I had such high hopes of breaking into broadcasting here. And again, I knew people put in the word. And again, when I got the interviews for one reason or another, thanks, but no thanks. And I do tell a story about one particular incident with a television station here in 31 Days. So, despite all of that, I took a job where my father worked, the Kansas Milling Company, just off of 13th Street, just not too far away from here. And he worked blue collar work, meaning from the standpoint whether it was 25 degrees below zero or 110, he packed, or he was a flour packer, meaning he loaded trucks, he loaded railroad cars with packs, with bags of flour. He was dusted with flour time and time again. And he would often work a double shift. Many times, my father would work a shift, come home, go to bed, get a phone call, Fred, can you come back? And he'd get up and go back to work another 8-hour shift. Many times, many times. So, I come back, I can't get a job in broadcasting. I knock on doors, as I said, it didn't happen. So dad gets me a job at the flour mill company. So I remember, okay, all right, how is this going to work? Okay, because I'm thinking office job. Okay, I have a degree. All right. Okay. I show up the first day, not in a certain type of casual, business casual. And I go to the human resources office, and they direct me over. No, you go over to the mill. Oh, okay. What am I going to do over there? I'll go over to the mill where my father goes. I'm handing the broom. Your job is a sweeper, to sweep the flour. Now, I have many allergies, a number of allergies. I'm allergic to all kinds of things. And I knew there's no way this is going to work out because I'm here in this environment just for 15, 20 minutes, and I'm having problems. Well, my mother knew that when I started that job, I was going to have problems. Other relatives, because of my allergies. So I can honestly stand here and say, my father worked 30, 35 years at the Kansas Milling Company. I worked, I think, one day. Maybe it was half a day, but I'm going to give myself credit. Maybe one full day I lasted at the Kansas Milling Company. And again, Dad worked there time and time again, 30 plus years. But as I said, I realized, no, this is not going to work. I can't do that. My health, I'm just miserable, miserable. So the next job that opened up was as on 21st and Woodlawn, there was a Kmart store. And I applied for a part-time, maybe it was full-time position in the automotive department as a sales clerk. That's what I did for several months until I transferred to the menswear department at Kmart. Why? I thought that I'm having such a tough time getting into broadcasting this way. What I'll do is I'll identify a graduate program somewhere in the United States that has a master's program that has a television station, commercial. I didn't want to do public broadcasting, commercial. And I figured if I went to a grad program that had a television station, surely, sooner or later, they would hire, I think they hire students, since it's affiliated with the college. And sure enough, I found two programs that I was interested in that fit my needs. University of Missouri at Columbia and Iowa State Ames. They both had commercial operating television stations. And I decided to go to Iowa State because University of Missouri, they admitted me for the following fall. I wanted to start sooner. At the time, Iowa State was on the quota system, so I was able to start in February. So I left and went to Iowa State and backdoored it, what I call it, meaning got involved with the graduate program. And then sure enough, yes, they did hire students to work at the television station, and eventually got on as a part-time student reporter there. Graduation from Iowa State with my master's. I learned the first time, okay, cultivate the seeds of opportunity soon. So I started my last several months, 6 to 9 months. At that time, you made resume tapes. So I'm working at the television station part-time, making resume tapes of my stories, sending them out all over the country, Not a single nibble. Okay, all right, but it's very competitive. It is. I knew that. And I learned my lesson the first time from American University that, again, you have to work, and it's very competitive. You have to work, and still the door may not open for you. And sure enough, I sent out many, many tapes. Nothing happened. And I was finishing up my master's thesis, writing it, and I had used up all my student eligibility. I had to come back home to Wichita again. And this time, I learned my lesson the first time. And I tried to dot the I's and cross the T's, and nothing happened. Come back to Wichita, finished up my master's thesis, took a job as a part-time shoe salesman at Baker's Women's Shoe Store. While I was working at Baker's Women's Shoe Store, Town East, I had to go back and defend my master's thesis in Iowa State. And a very kind gentleman by the name of Jack Shelley, again, I mentioned him in my book. I do a profile of him in my book. He was a longtime Iowa broadcaster. He had connections with WHO-TV Des Moines, which is where Ronald Reagan worked when he worked in television. And my professor told me on the way up to Ames to do my orals to stop by WHO-TV and talk to the news director. He didn't tell me why, told me to stop. Okay. I did. I was dressed in my jeans and sports shirt. I talk about this in my book, but I may have only had a t-shirt. I mean, I'm on the road, I'm going to Ames, and he tells me to stop by this TV station. I don't know why. And I stopped by and I talked to the news director. And obviously, my professor had talked to the news director. And the news director offers me my first job. After all of that, in my jeans, in my shirt, maybe even a t-shirt, but a sports shirt, off the road. And I said, well, God works in mysterious ways. However, being young and naive, my first job, he offers it to me very kindly. And I decide, okay, he tells me the salary. Then I think I'm in position to negotiate. So I start negotiating. And he says, Reggie, I can't pay you anymore. I mean, this is what the job pays. I'm paying you. All right, okay, that's fine. And I look back on that experience now. I say, oh, wow, Reggie, surely. But again, I was young. Didn't know any better. You know, thinking that this is how you take care of business. You get the job, you negotiate. I was in no position to negotiate. But nevertheless, again, the gentleman was very kind and understanding and compassionate, and he didn't withdraw his job offer. Very thankful. And I talk about an experience or two in my book, dealing with racism and prejudice and so on and so forth, they're at, not in the station, but dealing with the public. So, cut to the chase. Cut to the chase. I do television broadcasting for a year or so. A year. And you say, well, Reggie, after all of that, why did you leave television broadcasting? Why? I loved it. And I tell my students, I tell people, well, what happened? Now, I worked a number of months, 5 months to 6 months, or maybe a year, whatever it was, as a student reporter at WHO, meaning Channel 5. Had all kinds of news stories that I covered. And then my first full-time job, again, news broadcaster. But what I learned about myself when I was put in the full-time job after all those years of trying to make that goal, I just didn't like covering dead people. Let me say, you're supposed to be objective. The facts. This person was driving a car and was hit and so on and so forth. The facts. I could never disassociate myself from this person was just alive 10 minutes ago. There's the grocery bags there. What about his or her family, the loved ones? I'm thinking that way. I'm thinking, yes, I know I have to do my job, who, what, when, I understand that. But this was a person with a life who's gone. One story I did, it was a fire in a rural farmhouse, 10, 15, 20 miles outside the home. And I never have forgotten, fire, the house was consumed, and there was a newborn baby that died. And the fire chief told me that, well, we may not recover much of the body of the baby because it's newborn and the bones have developed and the fire is so hot and just, and again, my job is to who, what, when, where, why, but I'm thinking, those poor parents, the mother and the father. I'm saying all that to say this, that affected me, me from the standpoint, I just did not like that part of the job. There's a situation, you go knock on doors, stick the microphone, how do you feel? What happened? What did you see? Someone has lost someone. I just did not like that. That just wasn't me. I would not want to be treated that way. But that was my job. I say all that to say is I realize, thanks, but no. Now I like the happy news, the feature stories, what I call the feel good. I love that. I had a series that the news director gave me that called Night Scene. And anything at night, I could write, I could do. And that's what I did. Meaning I enjoyed that series, I enjoyed that opportunity, because again, I could focus on the good news, the happy news, the positive things. I didn't have to deal with the hard things of life or the hard news reporting. And as we know, I learned that careers often are made in journalism or broadcast journalism doing hard news. Hard news. And I realized that just wasn't me. I just couldn't. Well, yes, I did it because of my job for a while. I realized again that was not a good fit for me. So thus, I realized after fairly quickly that I probably need to shift gears. Oh, yes, I realized that I considered other jobs in communications, meaning television. And I realized those jobs are just so competitive, meaning the light news, the good news. And then I had met someone at Iowa State, became friends with someone who attended college in Mississippi, Alcorn State University. And as college students, as people often do, we talked about when we went to college experiences. And often he would tell me about his experiences at Alcorn, a historically Black college in rural Mississippi, even though he was from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I got to thinking, I have to make a change because in the hard news, it's just affecting me. covering people who are deceased effectively. And I thought, well, maybe I should try teaching. My approach would be, if I happen to be fortunate to land a job teaching, I would tell the students exactly how it is, what they need to know, the importance of deadlines, the importance of structure, the importance of being organized, the importance of being open-minded about people. And that was my introduction, meaning to college teaching. I contacted the school, the dean, they had an opening. Eventually, well, things fell into place and I started teaching at Alcorn State University. Stayed there in rural Mississippi for 2 years, going from the Midwest to the South, 1980, 81, the Deep South. And I saw, again, firsthand, racism, again, discrimination, a different life down south in rural Mississippi. The public school where our college was located, had we stayed where our children would have attended. For some reason, I had the occasion to go in the public school one day. When I walked in that building, I was shocked, meaning the ceilings, the facility, it was terrible. And I said to myself, if this school was located in Wichita, Kansas, they would close it down. It was that bad. It was that bad. I saw it for myself. And I realized there's no way that we're going to stay here in rural Mississippi and I'm going to subject any child or children of mine to this school system. No way. We stayed there for 2 years. My first oldest son was born in Natchez, Mississippi, which was, we were living on campus at Alcorn State University, 45-mile commute. Stayed at Alcorn, as I said, 2 years. Then I found a job or landed a job at Southern University, New Orleans, another historically Black university. This time my title was Assistant Professor, Director of Print Journalism. Stayed there for a year. At the back of my mind, law school. Law school is in the back of my mind since college. Not to be an attorney, for the education. You see, my family were blue-collar folk. There were no doctors, there were no lawyers. There were just a handful of teachers. Okay, and when I say teachers, my age, meaning my generation, like 5, 6, 7-year-old cousins older than I was. But we were blue-collar folk. And I realized time and time again, I had legal questions, and I figured if I go to law school, learn a little bit about the law, at least I would know something. My goal was not necessarily to practice law, no, it was to get the education. But I didn't want to go to law school down south. So to make a long story short, spent 2 years at Southern University, nice income, but God led me to go to law school, quit my job, moved my family of 2 little boys. My youngest son was 4 or 5 months old when I resigned my teaching job to go full-time law school at the University of Iowa College of Law. It was tough, it was hard, but we did it. We did it. Oh, thank you. After law school in those 3 grueling years, practiced law, Prairie State Legal Services, which I'll talk a little bit about in my book. During that period of time, 1991, practicing law, things are going well. I'm driving a bright red Mazda Miata sports car. Things are going well. I answer my call to the ministry. Okay. I have been called to the ministry, I believe, I know as a child, 9, 10, I know, because I once told my mother on vacation in Denver when I was 9, 10, 11, whatever it was, you know what I want to grow up to be? What? A preacher. I'm going to be a preacher. So I told my mother when I was 9, 10, 11, I was going to be a preacher. Okay. So I say all that to say is I deviated from that plan many years, and I finally answered my call when I was practicing law. But I had some challenges. The reason why I had some challenges, because when I answered my call to ministry, what happened was I was practicing law. And as you know, as a lawyer, your job is to be a zealous advocate for your client, whatever that may mean. Zealous advocate. I'm practicing law, Prairie State Legal Services. Answer my call to ministry. But, friends, what's happening is I may be defending drug dealers. Meaning, for example, there's something called technical defenses. You want to evict someone out of an apartment. You're supposed to submit a 30-day notice. You submit a 28-day notice. And then at the same time, you send it to the wrong address. Okay, technical defense. Well, all right. It's supposed to be 30 days. It's only 28. That's wrong. You said 1111 15th Street. You served it at 1103. Wrong address. You're getting thrown out of court. Okay, all right. But the drug dealer is dealing drugs in the apartment. So you are helping the drug dealer stay, you see my point? And after a while, I had problems with that. I'm going into ministry, or I'm a minister, but I'm advocating, defending drug dealers, so on and so forth. I had a problem. So after 1 or 2 or 3 years of that conflict, more conflict, meaning no one ever asked me to leave, I realized I can't do this anymore because of the moral conflict. So thus, I went back to journalism, this time as a newspaper reporter, and spent a couple, 3 years as a newspaper reporter, then back and forth, returned to law, returned to teaching at a college in Davenport. A number of different things happened. So I say all that to say is, all these various experiences, all careers as an attorney, television reporter, newspaper reporter, college professor, I was blessed that I remember things. Remember things, just as vivid, clear as if it happened yesterday. So fast forward. Reason why I'm here to talk about 31 days. All right, 31 days. Fast forward to 2016. And we have 3 adult children now. 2 boys I mentioned, and then our daughter was born in Rock Island. They're all grown up now. And my oldest son is expecting his first child, and my daughter is expecting her first child with their spouses 3 days apart. 3 days apart. 3 days apart. And my wife tells me, Reggie, you ought to write something for your grandchildren so they know something about you. Now, when she said that, there are many things I never told my children. And then when she said, you ought to consider writing something for your grandchildren so they will know something about you, that struck a chord. Yeah, that's right. Because again, I've written many newspaper stories, and for a while I was a freelance columnist, the short essays that I really enjoyed writing, columns. And I said, yeah, that's a great idea. I should write something, because I'm thinking in terms, my 2 sons live in New York City, and at the time my daughter was living in Memphis. She has since relocated, so all my children now live in New York City. And I'm thinking, we don't see or we don't talk to our children that much. So we certainly won't have well, come over to the house Friday night, babysit the grandchildren type experience that many people have. Because my grandchildren live on the East Coast. And we see them, well, we've not seen some of the grandchildren in 3 or 4 years because of the pandemic. So I say all that to say is, when my wife said, Reggie, you ought to write something for your children or grandchildren so they know something about your life. I'm thinking in terms of, yes, let's be real. Let's be real. By the time they are my age, I'll be long gone. And again, there are many things my children don't even know. I've never shared with them. And I started thinking, well, what can I write that will help them navigate this thing called life? Meaning from the standpoint of the ups and the downs, but most importantly, again, help prepare them from my eyes based on, well, I wonder what happened with grandpa and dad. Because again, I think in terms of my ancestors, and yes, I can say on one side of the family, if not both, yes, they're descendants of slaves. And I would love to know those people. And in my dedication in my book, I say dedication for my ancestors, whose faces, names, and lives I long to know. For my children, their children, and those to come who will only know my name with love across eternity. So when my wife mentioned that to me, I will write something for my grandchildren. I'm thinking, yes, I want to write something to help them with some of the hard lessons of life that I've learned from my lips, from my experiences, whether it's as an attorney, as a professor, as a father, whatever the case may be, things that they will have no idea if I don't tell them. So that's what prompted 31 days. And I started writing my essays. I covered all kinds of experiences, all kinds of things, and so on and so forth. And it was one of those things that I'm very grateful and appreciative to Blue Cedar Press for accepting my book, for encouraging my book, for encouraging me to tell my story. And so I had to edit some things down. But my point being, friends, all I'm saying is, when I started on this journey of writing a memoir, writing my story, I'm thinking in terms of those highlights and lowlights, things I remember vividly, conversations that I remember vividly, experiences that I remember vividly as if they were yesterday. And then I'm thinking in terms of just telling a story, meaning from standpoint of you just read such and such essay, you capture the sense, the essence of what I experienced, what I saw, what I felt at that time. Thinking in terms of, I'm trying to tell this story to someone who is impressionable, who is learning, who hasn't learned the ropes, who at times will become discouraged, maybe depressed, maybe feeling defeated, feeling that the world is against him, her, them. Words that, thinking in terms of, yes, life can and will be hard, but keep hope alive. You can make it. There are wonderful, wonderful people out there. Do not judge a book by its cover. Do not, even though you will be judged by your cover, do not judge a book by its cover, because you'll find that all kinds of people will fill in the gap and will help you. Not asking for anything in return, not asking or looking for anything. People are out there among all colors, all religions, all sexual identities, all fill in the blank. People will help you. You're not in this alone. So as I wrote my story, telling those stories, and I'm thinking, yes, if someone else, I'm sure that someone else could find some hope in these words, some light in these words, that, oh, that happened to him? Really? Well, still, okay, that happened to me, but we can make it. We can, is the glass half full or half empty? We can look at the glass being half full instead of half empty. So as I wrote and went back thinking in terms of those memories of, and there were some hard, some challenging, some tough things, some things, again, that I'm still pained to talk about, to live through. So what I learned from it. And the bottom line is, well, I'm a preacher. Keep hope alive. meaning from standpoint, just that. God is real. God has been real in my life. God has performed all kinds of miracles in my life, of which I don't even address in 31 days. And I know that, okay, all right, yes, prejudice and bias, and racism, and all those things are hard and sometimes life-threatening. Life-threatening, yes. I remember Mother and Pop talking about when they were kids in rural Oklahoma, meaning Eufaula, Muskogee, that area. And they were talking that they heard my grandparents, their parents, talk about lynching. Not something they read in the book someplace, not something that they read in the newspaper, but something that they heard via oral tradition, meaning, you know, this happened, in this case, lynching. I remember hearing my mother and pop talk about that. So I say all that to say, yes, in some instances, things, as we know, and I talk about one essay in my book, the first time that I was stopped driving while black as a teenager in Wichita, Buying Elementary School, in my experience. 17, I talk about that. And we know that sometimes how those things turn out, meaning someone dies. Very real, very real. Yes, I have seen it. Meaning from standpoint, those types of experiences, meaning that type of situation that could have turned. So that's the reason why I'm saying that I believe in miracles. Sometimes miracles happen, save us from dangers seen and unseen. 31 days, nights, my story. And I thought that, well, what do I want people to leave with when they read this? Again, just a snapshot. Just, you don't know what a person goes through unless you walk in his or their shoes. You don't know. And even if you, again, I'm a journalist. I know the key to observation. Yeah, you can observe all kinds of things, but it's different when you live things, when you live experiences, when you, well, just that. We all know that. And I thought that, yes, if a person who reads Sermon Days can just identify for just a few minutes, trying to walk in my shoes, or again, relive as I'm telling the story, the fear or the anger or the disgust or the anguish or whatever. 31 days, nights. But as I wrote and as we compiled the book, I didn't want it to be all negative, because again, there are wonderful people out there. So thus I purposely included some profiles and incidents of people who, again, wonderful. I call them angels. I believe in angels. Yes, I do believe in angels. Yes, and I can talk about that, but I won't. You asked me to come here for that. Okay, but yes, I believe in angels. I believe, again, in the power of God, in love, in Jesus Christ. And I say all that to say this, nothing. And I know I'm going back to those days of my ancestors working those fields, and my mother talked about picking cotton in Oklahoma. And my folks talk about the experiences they had growing up, the tales, the oral tradition. And I said, yeah, okay. My story is different from theirs, but still, it's one of those types of things. Everyone in this room has more than one story. It's not just, you know that. Not just one or two, you have many stories. Your life is composed of many stories. What role are you playing? Mother, father, sister, brother, so on and so forth. But what job? What political viewpoint you take? What religious, spiritual viewpoint? We play many roles. There are many parts to our personality. So thus, we all have many, many many stories. And if I can encourage you of one thing, consider telling your story, leaving your story. Because the bottom line is, when I thought about this, my wife, tell your story, and I'll be honest, as I said before, I'm thinking, okay, what will my grandchildren's grandchildren know about Reggie? My grandchildren's grandchildren. Yes, I was thinking about that when I wrote this. I'll be long gone in 50, 100 years. But somebody will be around. And again, when they see Reginald Dean Jarrell on that tombstone, 1957 dash, whatever it is, and someone thinks in terms of, well, what does that dash mean? Well, again, just a few words from myself, talking about some of those experiences in that dash. Because again, some point, we will be just a name that lingers on through the pages of time. I'm sorry, I didn't plan to go through all of that. I have my notes to talk about other things, but you want to hear about 31 days. And again, 31 days is just the tip of the iceberg of what I'm talking about as far as what I lived through, and then at the same time, my objective for the reader. And I thought that, well, I can't talk about this without talking about that, because it's all related. Meaning from the standpoint, I can't just jump into 31 days without telling you, well, how did it start? No, it did not start in college. It started back in elementary school when I was writing. So there's a method to the madness, as someone said. But as I said, thank you for your patience, and any questions?
Yeah, Reggie, would you talk a little bit about how you chose to do your memoir in this brilliant structure? Because you pick our 31 moments, right? And you write about each event.
First of all, to answer your question, I thought in terms of those highlights or lowlights of life, meaning just incidents. Then thinking in terms of, all right, someone else's point of view. What is the who, what, when, where, the basics to provide understanding of that incident or the setting? Now, I talked about being a newspaper columnist a while back, and I wrote columns, short columns, meaning 15, 20, 25 inches, meaning from the standpoint, learning how to tell a story briefly. And that's where my broadcasting skills kicked in, meaning from the standpoint of broadcasting, as you know, you're writing for the ear, conversationally, not for the eye. Short, we speak in short sentences, meaning from the standpoint when we write, meaning letters or whatever, write papers or whatever, but we're writing for it to be read. But when we speak in short sentences, conversationally. So again, when I wrote my columns, I wrote in that style, a short conversational style, short and to the point, but at the same time thinking in terms of, well, what is the basic information that I can include that what people will understand and identify with. Okay, so it's easy to fall in the trap of, I got to tell everything in 15 to 20 inches. No. Think in terms of one or two things. One thing, what is your point for that one particular story? Or what is that feeling that you want to convey for that one particular essay? Or again, in talking about Miss so-and-so, there's a feeling of joy. How do I transfer or translate that feeling of joy in a short 10 to 15 inches? Meaning starting with, again, your vivid memory of the conversation, of the sentence, of the incident, of the environment, whatever it is, starting there. And then again, how do I fill in the gaps so that the reader understands what's going on? Falling back on the newspaper column days, that's the way I structured my essays, meaning from the standpoint short, keeping it fairly brief 10 to 15 inches, so on and so forth, understanding that, well, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with unnecessary things, unnecessary details, which is, again, it's easy to fall into that trap. Keep it to the basics to help the reader understand where you're coming from at this point, this place, this time. Basically, keep it simple, short, whatever that may mean to you. Simple, meaning from the standpoint of the basics. Conversational, meaning as if you're having a conversation with a family member, as opposed to a long $10, $15, $20 academic sentence with all the nouns and verbs. And so, no, you don't want to write that way for a memo. As far as, from my point of view, still, I would say we all have our own writing style. So be you. Do you write your style? Always keep in mind the eyes of the reader who is reading this and the impact that your words will have on him or her. So again, if the reader is going to get lost in a 10, 15, 20, 25 word sentence, meaning lose the point, lose interest, you've lost your reader. Well, I'll go on and read something else now. Or I'll go read something else, period. I don't know. Keep it simple, stick to the point, identify the main point or points, meaning one or two that you're trying to make in that particular essay. Sometimes, if you know other people, meaning who shared or was in the environment with you, they could help. Okay. Sometimes there are other, for example, a song. You can go back, turn back the pages of time, sometimes with a song. Oh, okay, I remember Wildfire. I remember Impossible Dream. I remember Mr. Bojangles. Okay, that was being played, such and such incident, or that recording was being played at the wedding, and I was there with the wedding. Something, I mean, from the standpoint, sometimes something else can help jog or help you fill in the gaps. Sometimes, okay, all right. I remember I was a first grader. We had just come in from recess, standing in the hall of Ingalls Elementary School, crowd of children. And I remember two teachers talking about the President Kennedy had been assassinated. I remember that just a vivid day. Okay. I don't remember exactly what they said beside the president been shot. I remember hearing that. But I could build an essay just based on, okay, our President Kennedy was shot, he was in Dallas. That can help. That historical event can help. Okay, so all I'm suggesting for your consideration is thinking in terms, okay, I only remember just a glimpse. Okay, all right, what can help you put the pieces to the puzzle together from other sources? Let me be frank. There was a time, friends, when I was naive, and I said, well, yes, and I had friends, again from Mayberry, and some of the friends would say that my dad or my mother is prejudiced. They don't like Black people. And there was a time, friends, I would say, well, okay, that's fine, but they've not met me. They've not met me. So if they were to meet me, they wouldn't be prejudiced anymore. As I said, I was naive. And I learned my lesson that it doesn't make any difference. Some people just have certain feelings, preconceived feelings about people. And I write in one particular essay of an experience with an educator in my book. I was a faculty member at a particular college in Iowa. I've been a faculty member for 6, 7 years. I earned tenure after 3 or 4 years. I have a law degree. Preacher. Wrote a newspaper column. My title was Assistant Professor, Director of Multicultural Affairs. At that particular job, at that university, I learned there were just a handful of us, when I say us, Black employees. I was the only Black professor, assistant professor. My point is saying there were other Black employees there, 4 or 5 of us, but we talked about racism and prejudice on that campus. Long story short, I elected to leave. And my book talks about in specific why I left. But I thought, again, I'm going to negotiate a severance package. So I go into the president's office of the university. Now, president's university. And we talk, and I tell him my position, and he says, yes, Reg, I asked for a severance package. Yes, I want to do that. Yes, he said, I want to do that. Yes, he said yes. And I'm sitting at the table in this huge, magnificent office with this doctorate degree and so on and so forth. And he comes over to me, and he pats me on the head like you would pat a dog. Pats me on the head, top of the head, like you would pat a dog. True story. True story. I'm shocked. I'm a 40-something-year-old man. I'm a lawyer. I'm a professor. And here's this man patting me on my head like I'm a child or like I'm a dog. Now, before I wrote the book, I'd only told just a handful of people that. Who's going to believe that? Who's going to believe it? I told another administrator from that college about that. I did tell him. And he was on the outs, meaning for many years he had been on the inside. But when I told him he was on the outs, meaning he had been dismissed, he was going to be fired, so on and so forth. So he understood. But I say all that to say is, before I wrote the book, I could count on one hand the number of people I told that story. Because I didn't think people would believe it. But it didn't matter. It was the truth. I was there. And if you were to ask him, I know he would deny it. Doesn't matter. I know what it felt like to be patted on the head like a dog by the president of that university. Oh, hindsight, no, I did not get the severance package. I didn't get a dime, even though he said yes. So you say all this thing is, I include that story in the standpoint. Now, I don't think that he would pat someone else in a similar situation on the head like he patted me on my head that day. I don't think he would. So I'm just offering that story from the standpoint. My book talks about other incidents of things that I have experienced firsthand, not some story that somebody told me, but microaggressions and incidents of bias and prejudice that I have lived through and experienced. And as I said, at the time, I'm thinking, I can't believe this. I can't believe this. And I had another reaction that I won't go into, but no, I didn't say anything to it. But I know how I felt. I've never forgotten it. So when you mentioned that, your incident with your, with your relative and so on and so forth, I'm thinking, well, there are all kinds of things that some of us live through that we don't talk about, that we internalize. All kinds of things that sometimes make us angry. But again, you have to pick your battles. I mean, otherwise you live a life being angry all the time. But there are constructive means to, again, for change. But you can pass all the laws, you can pass all the policies, but what about changing people's hearts? Hearts. Hearts, that's what it counts. That's what matters. Changing or making people aware of what's in your heart. And that's what I'm saying, that with that president, the image is one thing that he promotes, but behind the scenes, and again, when I say we, those of us who work there who are African American, we talk about things that happen. That's not right. That's unfair. That's discrimination. What you're going to do? Meaning from the standpoint, yes, maybe sue, but again, sue, and even if you awarded $1, if you have grounds and so on and so forth, $1 or $1 million, that still doesn't mean it's going to change hearts. But sometimes it makes people gets their attention that we need to change some things. I say all that to say is, again, just all kinds of things happen like that, that again, many of us internalize.
Doc, could you read one or two stories?
I may have missed the first few minutes. What is the title 31 Days Nights in reference to?
All right.
Okay.
The title is in reference to 31 essays. All right. The title was specifically selected on its symbolic measures, if I can say it that way. Meaning there are 31 days in many months. Okay, 31 days. All right. 31 nights, the darkness, the nighttime, the harshness, the difficulty. But I chose the title, thinking in terms of, again, 31 essays, okay, all right, 31 days / nights, just as a means of this symbolic nature. 31 calendar days, 31 essays. Thinking in terms, okay, all right. Often people see memoir, okay, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages and so on and so forth. Well, again, this is my way of saying short, simple, succinct, 31. That's what you will find in the book, 31. And at the same time, well, you can jump around. Day 1, day 15, so on and so forth. Yes, 31 chronological days, but not necessarily as far as storytelling. Yes, there are points as far as, well, points of reference. This happened, and this happened, this happened. But from the stories or essays themselves, well, you can feel free to jump around, go back, forth, so on and so forth. But again, 31 days, symbolic of 31 calendar days. Utilize your writing style, what you are comfortable, or the way, the methods, the measures, techniques that you are comfortable. Again, write, sound like yourself, meaning whatever that may mean. You know you better than anybody else. You know the message that you want to get across. So again, think in terms of utilizing your voice, your way, and don't let someone else say, okay, all right, well, you need to sound like this person. Well, no, we're individuals, we're unique. Sound like yourself, be yourself, use your voice, whatever that voice may be or sound like. Be you, do you. Be true to yourself, about minds, be true to yourself. All right, I'll read my essays. This is day 16. The Parade, 1988-90, Quad Cities, Illinois, Iowa. Quad Cities actually in Illinois, Iowa consist of more than 4. It's like 6 to 8 communities, but nevertheless. Don't know how I found out about the Labor Day Parade, whether it was from a newspaper, television ad, or what, but I thought it would be a nice event for our 2 small sons. It was not held in Davenport, the community in which we live, but in one of the neighboring cities that bordered the Mississippi River and was part of the Quad Cities, even if that moniker was misleading, as there were actually 6 to 8 communities on both sides of the river. It was the late 1980s. I looked forward with great anticipation to the day's festivities and made sure to get to the parade route well before the crowds to get a prime spot. Found the perfect one on the edge of the street, just off the curb. Didn't want anything or anyone to block or even partially obstruct our view. Wasn't concerned about me or the wife, but wanted to make sure that the boys, about 6 and 4 years of age, wouldn't have any problem seeing. Wanted them to have a positive experience. To further set the stage, I must add that our boys were not rambunctious, push and shove, grab and shove children. Now, while certainly playful, they were polite, mild-mannered, respectful. Although, of course, I was biased, they were wonderful boys. The smaller community-oriented parade begins. Here we go. A marching band with horns a blaring, drums a blasting, feet a stomping, come sashaying by. Oh, beers afloat. What's that? Somebody throwing candy at children along the parade route? an added treat. Here it comes, a handful of candy being pitched this way, that way, children hastily scampering for the sugary sweet treasures landing near their feet. Okay, none tossed our way. Well, that's all right. Here comes another group with more candy raining down almost like pennies from heaven. But that rain of candy dries up when it nears our children. Hey, now something's going on here. It's so clear that even blind Bartimaeus could see how unholy, hateful, and downright sinful some of these people are. Time after time, when those parade participants pass our way, they toss no candy, no trinkets, no nothing in the area where our boys are standing. Even when parade marchers, old and young, all Caucasian, stroll by handing out goodies, they conveniently don't see our children and struck past our boys. It is noticeable and obvious and painful. This is not what I expected at all. Could it be because we were the only African Americans in that area? Oh, here comes some people dressed in blue uniforms, the garb of the United States Post Office. Surely someone in this group will exercise common decency. I get my hopes up. Surely someone in this group is colorblind and will share their treats with us. My oldest son has also noticed what is going on, how he and his little brother are being ignored time and time again. Daddy, why won't they give us any candy? He innocently asked, the bewilderment etched in his puzzled eyes. I make up some excuse to rationalize and hide the ignorance, cruelty, and hard hearts we are witnessing, the blatant racism. You'll get some, the parade is not over, I tell the 6-year-old, hoping I'm speaking the truth, but ever so aware that people, adults and even children, can be cruel without reason. They walk on by carrying their bags full of candy, but exercising very selective sight and even more selective giving. Should I have really been surprised? Isn't that the way it is too often in this good old US of A? At any and all levels, wherever there are so-called opportunities in jobs, education, salaries, housing, services, even when children seek to participate in a community parade. Back to parade. Unfortunately, these US Post Office workers suffer from the same sickening illness that afflicts the other parade participants. They too walk up to and right on past the boys, disregarding their pleading eyes, leaving our sons' palms still wide open and their small hands empty. This blatant disregard for little children, my children, pathetic, senseless, evil. I am more than a little perturbed. If I'd known this would happen, I never would have given this penny Annie parade the slightest thought. About ready to go home, and the boys still have zilch. Not a single soul has shared anything. I am not just disappointed, but disgusted. So much for this community parade. What is this? I see a very calculated, determined movement that catches my eye. A parade official or someone who looks to have something to do with the event is crossing the 4-lane street. The parade is still continuing, but he's walking through it. He is actually walking toward us. What is this? This middle-aged Caucasian man crosses the street, looking directly at us, well, actually looking at the boys. Not only have our 2 small boys noticed the slight, but so has this man. This stranger boldly steps to our boys. Ignoring the other surrounding children, he gives our son several trinkets and candy. He has seen what has happened, and clearly he wants to right the very hurtful wrong. He gives sincerely, graciously to our boys. We appreciate it. I thank him. We leave. We are thankful for this lone expression of grace, an unforgettable kind gesture that contrasts with our agonizing experience of ignorance, disrespect, and prejudice. Postscript, thanks, but no thanks. We don't need the aggravation. We will never again attend another Labor Day or any other community parade in this area. Keep your hard candy and cheap plastic trinkets. I know where the store is. The next parade we attend is years later. It was for Halloween and organized by an integrated community social service agency where the director and founder was African American. One of our children participated as a high school student in the late 1990s. Candy and other free trinkets were not an issue then. Teenagers could care less. Still relive that moment. I still see that. Standing right here, my boys in front of us, and time after time, people will give the children over here candy, walk right past the boys, and give the children on this side. Time after time. Until that last gentleman acted very boldly with grace. Day 14, apartment search, 1980, Des Moines, Iowa. Reggie Jarrell, News Center 13, had just taken my first full-time dream job as a television reporter at WHO TV. Thank you, Phil Thomas, for giving me that opportunity. In Des Moines, Iowa, and I was looking for an apartment to rent. Was temporarily housed in the downtown hotel. This was well before the convenience of the internet. I found the apartment by scanning newspaper ads and following up by mall mail. I didn't want to live in Des Moines proper, if at all possible, but was looking for a place in either the suburbs or the outskirts of the city. After years of chasing my dream, I was excited about this television reporting job finally becoming real, no longer a distant possibility. I was quite familiar with Des Moines, Iowa, the state capital, had relatives in the city, including one of Pop's sisters, the lovely, joyful Aunt Willie Mae, and her longtime wonderful husband, the kind and friendly Uncle Floyd. Ames, where I'd done graduate work, was about 25 or 30 easy interstate miles north of Des Moines. Felt comfortable with Des Moines. I felt at home. I was also very familiar with the city from working as a weekend student reporter at WOI-TV, the commercial television station then owned and operated by Iowa State University. Story assignments would sometimes require a trip to Des Moines, and I enjoyed those times hopping in the Channel 5 van news vehicle with a photographer and hitting the road. I thought I was prepared and ready for this new adventure, which of course began with the search for housing. I had in mind a studio apartment, preferably furnished. I really didn't want or need a one-bedroom place as I was thinking of the problem of buying and moving furniture. Then there were utility and other bills, and I was trying to keep expenses to a minimum. My search began. It didn't take long to run into a situation I was well aware of, but not expecting in this time and place. That old toxic poison. Why include this experience? Because my housing search was the very first time I'd ever tasted the rotten fruit of prejudice served in this particular manner. I saw a newspaper ad and I phoned and made arrangements to go and see the vacant apartment in an hour or so. When I arrived, I could see this really wasn't the type of place I was interested in, as the curb appeal was severely lacking. Didn't matter. Contacted the landlord's leasing agent, a middle-aged Caucasian woman. The woman said the place was rented. Already? Couldn't be that quickly. I had just talked to her or somebody on the phone. But I knew what game she was playing when I first laid eyes on her, or alternatively, when she laid eyes on me. Might not be able to judge a book by its cover, but faces and eyes don't lie. Her rigid features and her hardened eyes told me her story. Didn't argue with the woman, as I didn't care. Didn't want to live there anyway. But I thought as a reporter, this would make an ideal subject for an expose on subtle racism, discriminatory actions, and supposedly public accommodations. Went to another apartment complex the same day. This garden apartment, i.e. basement level, was located in one of the western suburbs of the city. The complex featured a sole building on the east side of a somewhat busy street. The location was okay, but the building's exterior pea green color was just plain and simply ugly. The same color scheme extended to the interior walls of the apartment. I didn't care for that color. I couldn't see myself getting up from bed or coming home looking at those slimy, vomit colored walls. Yes, it was that bad. Unfortunately, or more. The landlord, another woman, was friendly enough as she showed me the place. She was informative enough, perhaps too informative. She pointed out that I might not be comfortable there because of one particular resident. Don't remember the details, but she made it clear that although I was free to rent the apartment, my neighbor would not be welcoming. Now, I could take that one of two ways. One, the landlord was lying, and it wasn't the neighbor, but the management who wasn't welcoming and didn't want an integrated building. Or two, she was being truthful, trying to be helpful in issuing the warning. I thought, however, if in fact a resident was racist, I had as much right to the peaceful enjoyment of the premises as they did. If there was a problem, the landlord had the obligation to at least attempt to keep the peace. A bit naive in my thinking, but then again, while I had encountered racism and discrimination before, I had yet to learn that in many instances in the good old US of A, the predominant and default attitude, much too often, is to maintain and sustain the status quo. And that usually means to the benefit of the most powerful, to the detriment of the least powerful. Didn't have to think long about that place. Even if everything had been hunky-dory, I still would not want to look at or live with those offensive green walls. Thus, I resumed my search, but my adventure didn't last long. The third place I found was a multi-building complex with white buildings trimmed in black in Urbandale, another West Des Moines suburb. And I knew when I first saw it, this was it. This was the place for me. I felt comfortable and at home just walking around the place that very first time, like a warm, comfortable old shoe. It felt like a good fit. Walked into the manager's office, no problem, no games, no antics. Looked at the available studio apartment, a second-story, very modern unit with a balcony, lovely carpet, a large perfect bed that folded into the wall, and all the other amenities one would expect. And the price was right. Wonderful. My venture was just beginning in more ways than one.